Okay everyone, we are back here just after lunch on the second day of the European Pain Federation Congress in Budapest. Today is September the 21st and I am joined here in the studio as well with Romy Parker and Tasha Stanton. So Romy, you're from South Africa, if people by chance should know you. Tash, you're Australian, and both of these things will reveal as soon as you start talking. So why don't you do that and tell us a little bit about yourself? Do you want to go first, Romy?
Thanks, I'll take pride of place, sure. Background-wise, I'm a physiotherapist, but I'm now a professor in the Department of Anesthesia and Perioperative Medicine at the University of Cape Town in South Africa, which is fabulous because I get to work in interdisciplinary teams. I work in acute pain, chronic pain, anaesthetists, nurses, physios, psychologists, psychiatrists. So we mix it up on a daily basis, which is fun and challenging across the board in many ways.
Nice. And you, Tash?
Yeah, so I am based out of the University of South Australia in Adelaide, beautiful wine region. That only partially factors into my research, but co-director of Impact in Health at UniSA, and then I lead the Persistent Pain Research Group out of SOMRI, which is a research institute. And yeah, I've just been really fascinated by how we can help people with pain. And my background as well is as a physiotherapist, but I probably would more accurately call myself now a clinical pain neuroscientist. So a lot of my work and my team's work is really trying to better understand different sensory and cognitive contributors to pain so that we can then, inform what we're telling people, inform our treatments, and create new treatments.
And that's exactly why we're here. So we invited you here to talk about education. And in this setting here, that education we mean is our role in teaching, telling, explaining, talking to people about pain using set narratives. They might be individualized, or might be metaphorical, or any of that. So again, just to clarify that, I guess many people would have read Explain Pain. Fantastic books, 20 years on the back now. But a lot has happened, and this field is exploded, both in research but also in clinical use. So I was hoping, with you two experts in the room, that we could have a discussion about where are we now and where's this taking us. So maybe the first thing to do is, are you working with research-wise, clinically or research-wise, with patient education in some form?
Yeah. So within my work, working directly with patient education and a version of Explain Pain with people with painful osteoarthritis. So we're doing a big clinical trial. I've also been part of a recent clinical back pain trial that's looking at pain science education and a graded sensory motor retraining program that was led by James Macaulay's group in Neura. It's for quite a few different conditions, and that's been, I think, a really interesting experience, seeing potentially the necessary specificity that we might need for other conditions, because of course it was created for back pain originally.
Yeah, so essentially what you're saying is that we started out, let's just say 2003, there was a book called Explain Pain. It's for everyone with pain. That was lasting longer. And what you're saying is that the stories in that, if we should use them today, they should be more specific to the condition.
I think it's actually, it is. I think it's really quite relevant because there are very different narratives surrounding osteoarthritis and beliefs than we might have with back pain. So one thing as an example that we see is people with osteoarthritis, they sometimes aren't as fearful as people with back pain are for a very specific activity, but they have this narrative pounded into their head that it's a wear and tear disease, so that the more that I do, the worse I'm going to make it. It's bone on bone, I have no cartilage left, therefore, yes, I know exercise should work, but not for me. I have to go to the surgeon to replace this cartilage. So we really found that we actually had to develop very specific content about cartilage, because that is a huge aspect of the story, and if you ignore it, you've not connected to people.
Can you let us into that for a second? So if it's not bone on bone, what is it then?
Well, I think what we start to know is that we see that osteoarthritis is a mild systemic inflammatory process that manifests in the joint. So when we understand that there's actually inflammation playing a role, actually a lot of different factors that can influence inflammation, activity, diet, I'd argue education and affect in our cognitions as well. Once we understand that those things can be influenced, it can kind of make sense why we should be maybe learning a bit more about osteoarthritis, moving a bit more, Because I would argue that that narrative about moving more makes no sense if you think osteoarthritis is wear and tear. Like, you shouldn't move. So I think that understanding some of those misconceptions specific to that population is really, really important.
Yeah, and again, talking about specific populations, Romy, I know this is something that is close to your heart.
Yeah, so I mean, listening to you now talking about osteoarthritis, the first specific population that I think of that's relevant for me, never mind my general population, but people living with HIV. So we've got the largest HIV positive population in the world, and we know that when you're living with HIV, you're particularly at risk for developing widespread pain, multiple pain sites, and that pain's not related to viral load or opportunistic infections, it's something else, right? And if we understand pain as threat, well then what's more threatening than living with HIV every day? So some of our early work was on using the explain pain approach in people living with HIV, but it needed to be targeted and specific. Why is it okay for me to say that I've got pain everywhere if my HIV is under control and not wake up in fear every morning that does this mean that now I'm dying? So we've done quite a lot of work on 6-week exercise education programs on people living with HIV to address their pain, and was wonderfully effective, but the landscape has changed because over the last 20 years our treatment of HIV is so much better that now pain is really no longer such a big issue in that population. So again, you've got to make sure that you're thinking about all of the variables that contribute to somebody feeling threatened. It's not just having osteoarthritis, it's someone telling you that it's wear and tear.
That's really curious. So I understand the process of having better treatment and that now HIV is a condition you can live with, but yeah. I would assume that they have as much pain as everyone else. And my bias here would be that when they have it and they also have a disease, they might blame it on the disease because there was a pain story related to HIV in the earlier days. Is that not what you're saying?
So what we're seeing is they actually still have more pain than everybody else. And what we're exploring around that is that there's still a massive amounts of stigma globally about living with HIV. And that's self-stigma as well as societal stigma. So that contributes to your ability to cope and be resilient and pain. You know, one way that we talk about pain more widely in our population is that it's an expression of suffering. And it's a very accepted expression of suffering. So you've heard me say this before, but you know, a patient once taught me such a lesson that I had been asked to go and see this little old lady in the middle of the bush, all right? And I was visiting my master's student, and all the community health workers heard that the pain physio was here, you know. So off we went. We drove through an hour, sand tracks, like I don't know where we were going. Ended up at this little hut, no water, no electricity. This elderly lady, Gogo, living there on her own. And they had asked me to go and see her because she had pain everywhere. So, you know, one of my standard first questions is, why do you think you're in pain, Gogo? I can never say this without crying. And her answer was, because I'm lonely, my child. She understood it. She understood pain way more deeply than we do. She understood that her pain was an expression of suffering, that her children had left, many of them had died, her grandchildren had left, and she was lost and lonely, and that's why she was in pain. She didn't need me to explain pain to her. She understood it. She needed me to help her reconstruct a life.
Which actually brings me to a question that I've been wondering about quite a long time. Again, I can say that I know there was books before Explain Pain, like Michael Nicholas's book, and of course the Back Pain Revolution. There was books on pain, paradigm shifting, and all of that. But for me, the Explain Pain book was really a paradigm shift in my world. So I understand people who have that feeling. But also, I must say, so what I did, I read it obviously, and then I was engaged in the thought, in the thinking process and the metaphors right away. Went to all the courses, did all of that, and I just loved it. But what I found actually when I reflect back on that was it was probably more helpful for me than my patients, essentially. So I guess that's the question: is are we teaching our patients, or or should we call it teaching ourselves, even if what we're doing is giving patients stories? What do you think?
I think it's complex, because I think that, part of it certainly is teaching ourselves, because I think once I had an understanding of more the different contributors and the extent to which those contributors can be a strong influence on the pain experience, like I felt way more confident in saying to people, you're safe to move. Like trusting what I see in an objective assessment and being quite confident that the information that I'm giving them is actually not setting them up for failure. So I actually think that is a key aspect of it. But I wonder whether part of what we're doing is when we're kind of creating those narratives with people, sometimes I think it is less about the exact information and more about connecting with that person and understanding their narrative and helping them explore with curiosity maybe the new journey that they could be on. Because I think as soon as we're giving information, look, that doesn't apply to life, right? Like, how do you apply it?
So just because I think I know where you're going, and I just want to say something and ask you if you would agree on that. Because essentially what you're saying, and I think that's what I would have said if I was as good as pronouncing what I think as you are, is really that what happened was I understood pain better, and therefore I understood the people with that pain better, and they then responded positively to me understanding them better. So it's really a really diverse process of me thinking that I was explaining pain, and literally what was happening, I think, was probably that they just saw that I actually understood them.
Yeah.
Which could be done in many ways,
yes.
and metaphors is one of them. So my question to you, and I don't know if this is where you would have gone, but do you think culture makes a difference and how we meet people?
Absolutely, culture makes a difference. And I think one of the advantages that I have in my setting is that we foreground culture and we acknowledge culture. And we lost it for quite a long time because we westernized our approach to medicine, and so we started being very uncultural in the medical setting, very formal. Now we're recognizing the importance of culture. We're going back to culture in our settings. So simple things. In an African culture, it is incredibly rude not to ask you how you are, not to ask you how your family are, how everybody is, before we get down to the business of the meeting, okay? In South Africa, so cold callers, on the phone, you don't get a hello, you get a how are you, and you have to go through the I'm fine, thank you, how are you, before you can find out, no, I don't want whatever it is that you're selling to me, okay? So, but in a clinical setting, that is so valuable and important because it's a process of, I see you, I know who you are, and I value you before your disease. Whereas in Western medicine, we're like, right, why are you here? What's wrong with your knee? Let's get on with it. Right, but who am I? You don't know who I am. So then, if you're explaining pain to me, how do you meet me in explaining to me in the way I need it? Because you don't know me. So in an African setting, we're very clear about foregrounding who you are and seeing that. And then I can say, hey, when I was a kid growing up, we used to play in the veld, in the bush. And there were those big anthills. And we all used to climb up those anthills because then you could see everybody hiding in the bush, And then you'd be nasty and kick the anthills and damage the anthills, and all the ants would come out to fix the repair. You can use that as a metaphor because after a while, you're not damaging the anthill. Just playing around the anthill as kids, all the ants come out to see what you're doing. So if you've got that connection with somebody, you can then create a metaphorical explanation that they're like, yeah, I get it. Which I think is a shift. In the early days when we talked about explain pain, I think we all got completely obsessed about making sure that the metaphor was physiologically accurate. Oh no, that bit's wrong because that's not what happens physiologically. And we tied ourselves up in knots about it. But I think that point you made, Tasha, is that doesn't matter so much. It's the person getting it, which is what Loz is always saying. If they get it. and it's kind of in my context, silence is something we're quite comfortable with. So you can put an explanation out there and then just wait. And you might just get the look of, what? But you might also get the, you mean, are you saying, and that's education.
So are we talking more about communication than actually education? Is that where we're going?
Look, I think good communication is a key aspect of it, but I do think that there is relevance within the education of that, because if you have a certain framework, it's very difficult to undertake things like starting to re-engage with movement and re-engage with life if you don't understand why that might be important. And I think for some people, and we found this in one of our osteoarthritis trials, they merely needed someone to very confidently tell them, movement is okay. That's all that was needed. But then we see other people that, I don't know if I believe you. Yeah. Why should I move? And so I think that regardless of the person in front of us, how we communicate things is incredibly important in terms of an validating nature, empathic nature, but that we don't always need to, harp on every single concept with every single person. But that for some people it is actually key to that critical shift.
And I guess this takes us into, because you're both working actively with research on education as well. And I know you are particularly, Tasha, involved in these ideas about going out and teaching people who are not in pain, as it were. So in the beginning it would be people in pain and we'd explain their pain to them, which is maybe not what we did anyways. But now you go out to rural areas and you educate people to be sort of go-to people in rural settings so that everyone can get the right message. How, could you elaborate a bit on why do you think that works? I mean, I think I understand why, but it would be nice to hear, what do you think is the nuts and bolts or the mechanisms that you're trying to trigger?
Yeah, I suppose what we're trying to, with these programs, and it's called the Local Pain Educator Program, what we're trying to do is increase capacity, particularly in those lower areas. And we're not saying, I don't think necessarily that we have all the answers, but what we are saying is you look and you talk to the people that are in those areas, and some of the care that they've received is what you might expect is received 20 to 30 years ago. They're still being told if they have fibromyalgia that it's not a real thing. It's shocking. And so what we try to do is go into the areas, find people that are interested and wanting to manage and help with pain care better, and then upskilling them and giving them some of this knowledge, some of this understanding, so that they're not holding the town on their shoulders, but they can be that point of care where we have someone local that can find out about the local services that are actually really good, can find out that, so-and-so in this town next is a perfect connection if we need to find a GP. And you don't know that unless you have local people on the ground. And I think it really stemmed from this aspect that we would go in and give lectures and then toodaloo.
It's almost like going back to the early days and the campfires, right? Where you sat there in the evening protected from animals and getting a bit of heat and some good advice from the elderly.
So it's really interesting because I think it's about that capacity, and I think there is also relevance in if people have heard a little bit of that message, maybe at some point or the other, maybe we've created also more empathy in a family member or a carer. Maybe we've also just created openness to new things the next time someone talks about it. So I don't know, I just think that it's like planting seeds.
Yeah.
I think the other value of that model is that there's validity in hearing the message from somebody who's in my culture and in my context and knows my daily reality.
Fabulous point.
If I'm zooming into your little rural town in the back end of nowhere and via Zoom giving you all of this information, yeah, but what do you know what it's like to live here and deal with the things that I deal with? Whereas if it's somebody in my community who has the daily stresses and challenges that I have, they know it in a much better way than I do as the outside expert, because I'm not an expert in their context and environment. And then that person has the network, right? They're like, oh, did you know that these guys get together on a Wednesday morning and do exercise? And did you know that so-and-so's got a painting group? So you've got that, which we don't have because we're not members of the community.
And that's a really good point, because I think this social aspect of things sometimes is really underplayed. Like, I feel like we're getting a bit better at delving into psychological, but then we still forget about social. And I think those dynamics and that feeling of re-engaging within a community and being supported by your community, that's huge.
Yeah.
Wow.
So can we come back, so you are writing a book right now that is set in a South African context, so you've really gone a long way to make sure that it matches the population that you're sending the book out to. Would you tell us a bit about the book, and maybe just like with Tash before, let us know what you think is going to be the working mechanism, if there is as such?
So working mechanism, I'll start from there, because we're talking about education, and I think early days, our pain education, we were all working on pedagogy, tell people stuff, and when they know it, they'll get better. Now we're kind of going, adult education, andragogy, like find out what they think and know, where they are, and meet them where they are. And that's really what we're trying to foreground in the book. So our book, Understanding Pain, free, open access online, and hopefully in January it'll be live and out there. So we're trying to teach healthcare professionals a very methodical, mechanism-based clinical reasoning approach to pain. But the spotlight's got to be on the people. For too long, we have objectified people with pain. We talk about them as the patient with the sore knee. And then in the textbook, it's patellofemoral pain. It's fibromyalgia. Here's the chapter on osteoarthritis. No, our chapter's on Howard. Howard tells us his story about osteoarthritis. So throughout the book, every chapter is a person who is telling us their story in their own words. And in between their story, we've included the epidemiology of the condition, the pain physiology, how we did assess this person, or how we would suggest assessing this person. Treatment plans, and treatment plans that are relevant to our context. If you have this drug available, that would be great, but most of us don't. So these are our options. The gym is not an option. So here is, how do we propose problem solving in context? So throughout the book, it's patient stories. It's really keeping the person with pain central, and being very careful in the language of the book to ensure that we are always interdisciplinary in our approach. So the authors of the book, I'm a physio, the co-editors are paramedic, we've got anaesthetists and psychologists and psychiatrists and community health workers and nurses and patients, people with pain. All of us are equal in this book as contributors. And when we're writing about managing someone's pain, we're very careful about ensuring that that interdisciplinary flat hierarchy is continual. And it's been a real challenge for many of us writing the book, because when you're writing a chapter about someone and you know that they're going to go back and read what you write, you suddenly write in a different way, don't you? You're like, oh, the way that I wrote that wasn't terribly kind. They're about to read this. I'm going to write that differently. What does that say about us as clinicians if we think in that way? So what I'm hoping is that by modeling this, that the baby doctors and physios and nurses who are engaging with this material will see that this is a way of practicing as a healthcare professional that's different to what we commonly see.
Yeah, so I guess what you both are doing is changing paradigms, or bidding into changing paradigms at least. So doing the best to avoid it, the difficulties of having an invisible disease, or being confronted with someone says something, another one says something. So a textbook that sort of is contextualized to who I am and what I'm doing. But a thing that I sometimes wonder is how do we know if this is any better? So couldn't you just be giving out the new best explanations for how to lift heavy loads, and you're writing the new NIOS guidelines on how to calculate what you can lift? I mean, why is this better? As far as I know, the evidence is not there to say that it is superior to many other things. So why is this better, and how are we not just doing the same mistake again, or are we? And would it matter if we are? I don't know. It's an open question.
I guess with this, it's hard, isn't it? Because I guess how I see it is, I think of it in terms of it's constantly evolving for me. So we went from something that was incredibly, frankly, didactic, and it was explaining pain to people. And now we're really looking at things where it's about meeting the learner where they're at and making it part of a learning process. But the thing is I guess we do rely upon the evidence to look to see, is this better, is this helpful? And so I think there is, better evidence that if it's combined with a program that is involving activity and re-engagement with life, we see nicer outcomes than if we just give it all by itself, that's certain. But I think we should expect that probably what we're going to see in 20 years is not, I hope, what we have now, right? Like, it always should be updating. So I guess it's like, I don't see that where we're at is the end. So because I'm deciding to be future looking, it's very difficult to answer this question. But no, I think though that there's a lot of value in listening and hearing patients and them telling us what they want. And as an example of people with back pain in qualitative work, they're saying, I want to know the cause. I want to know why I hurt. And we might not be able to answer that fully, but we can give them an alternative explanation that helps them re-engage with life. And so I think in that sense, I'm helping them to return to where they want to be, and that feels like a really important thing. And so even if 10 years down the road we realize, actually that is a bit antiquated, that doesn't work anymore, I'm okay with that because that's how science works and that's exactly what we should expect. So a very non-committal answer.
What about you, Romy? What do you think?
I'll probably also end up being non-committal because I didn't set out on this journey to do something that was better. I work in the majority world, so you guys are the weird ones, right? Are you familiar with being weird? Did you know you're weird?
Yes,
you're Western,
actually.
Educated, industrialized, rich and democratic, and you're the minority world, and that's where the majority of the pain work is done. I live and work in the majority world. And to learn from you guys and then see what is going to work in my environment, I have to do it differently.
Absolutely. And I think that's such an important point because I think a lot of our studies that look at it, we tend to get higher SES, higher educated people. We see maybe these nice responses, but when we start to look at, lower socioeconomic status, there are so many other barriers in place that it's not just about that pain explanation or this giving them a new narrative. It can be helpful, but there are real tangible barriers that actually, I think from a health equity lens, we probably need to be thinking about and targeting as us as pain researchers.
So there are absolute barriers, and most of them are system barriers, but there are also some awesome facilitators and opportunities when you look at different cultures and different ways of engaging and understanding health, what health means.
Yes.
This idea of biopsychosocial that we think is so revolutionary. How many cultures in the world kind of look at us and go, well, yeah, what are you guys on about? Of course. It's not a revolutionary concept for them. So what can we be gaining from those cultures and bringing into what we're doing instead of just thinking, oh, they're dealing with so many barriers. They've got different ways of seeing things and different ways of being and working that actually might be revolutionary to what we're doing. So that's a big part of the kind of drum that I'm banging at the moment, is that instead of thinking of people working in low middle income countries in those sort of settings as the poor relatives who you need to go and help all the time, think about what opportunities, what way do they have of seeing the world that could really enrich the work that we're doing. And I think that's really what I've been focusing on is how do we approach teaching people about pain from our cultural concept? How would we do this? This is how we would do this. Is it different? Is it better? I don't know if it's better, but let's try different.
It's almost like you would agree that it's the baby and the bathwater discussion again, isn't it? There's something we keep, and maybe we change the directions, the guidelines, the way we use words, the importance of how the person in front of us is and what culture we're in. But there's some things that we stick with. So let's imagine 20 years or 30 years from now, we realize that this whole thing about educating patients is really arrogant, and how do we know it's really their lives, and we have different tools that we can replace it with. So imagine we were 30 years from now, we were giving advices to ourselves today. What advice would you give yourself on what have you learned on this journey from one paradigm, the biomedical loading paradigm as well, to a more broader understanding of the person in pain? Is there something you could tell yourself when you're stiff and 30 years older and you've done this work for so long that it is your identity?
Well, that's a good one. It's a thinker, isn't it?
That is. That's a glass of wine.
Do you need a cab sav?
Yeah,
actually.
Yeah, that is a cab sav.
You know, I think it would be ensure you stay curious and you stay asking questions of the people that are often in the surroundings, that may not always be in the spotlight, that may not always be the driver of X, Y, Z, whatever it is. Because I think that sometimes, you know, some really, really cool ideas and ways forward, you know what, if they don't just get picked up, they kind of get missed. And we see that even now. We look back into the literature and we're like, they already did this 30 years ago. My brilliant idea has already been done. But it just never got picked up. So I think there's real merit in just saying, stay curious and stay open, and don't attach like your own self-worth to one thing. If you're not willing for it to change, then actually you're one of the dinosaurs that need to retire.
Well, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem.
That's right.
Yeah.
What do you think, Romy? What would be your best advice to yourself?
Yeah, I don't know that I'm going to live another 30 years, but I am. So it is something I've been thinking about a lot recently, and it's the metaphor of the lion. So lions, we think of them as the apex predator, but did you know that they're only successful 25% of the time on a hunt? Right. So they're fabulous. So 25%. As an NNT, does that sound familiar? so 25% success. The interesting thing is that if you move a lion from
there would be an
ecosystem,
NNE, right? Numbers needed to eat, or numbers needed to attack.
If you move the lion out of their environment where they're successful 25% of the time into a fresh environment, when we do these kind of transplants, they often starve to death. So you might have something that's brilliant in one context, but when you move them into another context, you've got to think about the context. So I think it comes back to what you were saying of keep an eye on the people who matter. Where are they and who are they? And keep humble. You know, don't be the proud lion who thinks that you're the apex and you've got it all, because in a new context and new people, it might all fall apart. And I think that's like be a humble lion.
So it sounds like you want to be up in the clouds. So I'll try and be very, very precise. Would the best advice be? So if I was asked, and I would go back, and I think what I would say if I was giving some concrete advice would be listen to the evidence. I mean, even hopefully the evidence will be different and our methods will be improved and all of that. But I think that's been part of what has helped me on my journey, at least, has been trying to reflect on the evidence rather than my ideas.
Yeah.
So instead of being attached to a theory, then listen to the evidence and explain the evidence, as it were, instead of explaining the theories. Maybe I'm just biased. I don't know.
I think that's an exciting thought, and what excites me about that is that just by having this conversation, we've been doing that over the last 20 years, right? We aren't so married to the one theory that we're not willing to be flexible and change. And I think that's what we welcome, is that we want to be continually checking the evidence and digging and being comfortable with that. And maybe that's what makes a difference when you're engaging with a patient, is being comfortable with the mess, with the uncertainty, and being flexible and saying, this is the current evidence, this is, instead of this is the theory. It could be fun.
No, I think that's lovely advice, because I think at the end of the day, that's what we base a lot of these things on. So, and yeah, the more that you can kind of, I think, even challenge what we think sometimes. Like, I kind of love sometimes going to different talks or conferences that really are different than what I think, because it's important that we challenge some of our own biases. And I mean, that is, I think, first of all, how we grow as individuals, but also then how a field can grow. So I think that's wonderful advice.
So if we were to finish off on a sort of shorter term, not 30 years, but shorter term, where would you like to see what we're doing, perhaps with the work you presented? So what is your book done in 5 years, and what is your work on osteoarthritis and education done in 5 years' time, if you could decide? Funding not be an issue, obviously?
Funding not be an issue. My books are out there. What I would like to be seeing in South African and resource-poor settings is people with pain getting the appropriate treatments at the primary level of care from people who get it and understand it, who are within their context and their culture, so that I can go to the local physio or the local GP in my rural village, wherever that may be, and they see me and they see my pain and they validate it and they help me move on with my life. That's so having research.
The role of your book in that would be to help people have a more common, more contemporary understanding of what pain is, and meeting the person based on this contemporary understanding.
Yeah. My personal goal is that every South African should be able to access a healthcare professional who understands pain, a contemporary understanding of pain.
Yeah, obviously then when they do, obviously that is an issue, resources is an issue, and then when they do, you would like your book to the person they then meet at least has an updated view on, or contemporary view.
Updated contemporary view of pain, and then our research is then, so where we're going next with our research is developing interventions that can be delivered at a primary level of care in diverse rural areas.
Nice.
So that they can get treatment that
works. What about your work,
too.
Tash?
I would love people that have osteoarthritis, when they see a health practitioner, they're given a message of hope. They are not given a message of inevitability, of decline, of you just have this degenerative condition. I would like them to get that, what I think is an accurate message of hope, with clear steps in place of some of the interventions that may be helpful for them. Like, one way I think that's really interesting to think about is if someone has something like a heart attack, there's a clear medical sequelae that goes on, clear clinical care pathways, and we just do not have the same thing for osteoarthritis. So I think I would love to see system level changes, but underpinning that would be knowledge informed changes at a clinical level and even a societal level, so that people do understand the importance of these, other interventions that are beyond surgery.
Very nice. So I have a feeling we could continue, couldn't we? But
bring the wine.
We'll make, for the sake of this time, we'll cut it off here, and we'll continue the debate later over Cap South or whatever.
I love it.
But thank you so much, both of you, for coming. It's been an absolute pleasure. And thank you for everyone out there listening. And don't forget, you can share this all you like. So do that.
Thank you, Martin.